5 years into my marriage with Rachel, I thought I'd built something unbreakable. A home filled with quiet evenings, stable jobs anchoring us, and a bond that gleamed like polished silver to anyone looking in. At 32 I was Ethan, a man who'd poured himself into that life, believing it was ours to share. But beneath the surface, cracks had spiderwebbed for 2 years. Failed attempts at a child, each negative test a silent fracture, until Rachel's trembling voice pitched IVF as our lifeline. I lipped at it, trusting her completely as she took the reins, never imagining she'd wield that trust like a blade. Months later, her belly swelled, my joy rising with it. Until I uncovered the truth. She'd swapped our embryos with her exes, chasing superior gins behind my back, erasing me from the child I thought was mine. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was annihilation. I didn't scream or walk away. I dismantled our life in secret, stripping her of everything she'd stolen from me, leaving her to face the ruin she'd sown. What unfolded wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation, raw and deliberate, born from a trust I'd never offer again. Our 5th anniversary had passed in a blur of candlelight and half-spoken promises. The kind you make when you're still betting on forever. Rachel and I had carved out a life that hummed with routine. A tidy house on a quiet street. My engineering job steady, her graphic design gig reliable. At 32 and 30 we were a postcard couple the kind neighbors envied. But 2 years into trying for a baby that picture frayed. It started with hope. Late night talks about names. A crib we'd pick someday. Then slid into despair. Negative tests piled up, each one a quiet theft, stripping away the laughter until our nights grew heavy with silence. We'd sit across the dinner table, forks scraping plates, avoiding eyes, waiting for the next try, the next doctor's call, the next letdown. The air thickened with it. Disappointment, then desperation, a slow bleed we couldn't staunch. One evening Rachel broke the quiet, her voice cracking like thin ice. IVF's our best shot, Ethan. Her hazel eyes shimmered, wide with a hope I hadn't seen in months, and I felt it flare in me too. Yeah, I said, hand squeezing hers. Let's do it. I didn't hesitate, didn't question. 5 years of trust held me steady, and her plea felt like ours, a shared lifeline to pull us through. She dove into the details. Appointments, meds, timelines. While I nodded, grateful she'd take the lead. You're swamped at work, she'd say, brushing my cheek. Let me handle it, babe. It's just routine. I believed her, blind to the fault lines widening beneath us, certain we were still a team chasing the same dream. Rachel took the wheel on IVF like it was her mission. Her voice firm. I've got this, Ethan. And I let her, stepping back from the whirlwind of injections and schedules. It's just paperwork and check-ins. She'd insist, her smile soft. The clinical call if they need you. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? 5 years of shared mornings, her coffee brewing beside mine, had welded that faith into me. I'd catch her poring over forms at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed, and feel a pang of gratitude. She was carrying this for us. The day of the embryo transfer, I was there. Gripping her hand in the sterile room, the doctor's calm voice a hum, as he slid the catheter in place. Rachel's fingers tightened around mine, her breath hitching. I thought it was nervous, maybe awe, and I whispered, this is it. Picturing our future taking root right then. Months rolled on, her belly rounding, and I'd rest my hand there, feeling kicks. Imagining a kid with her hazel eyes and my stubborn streak. She'd smile, tired but bright. Our little miracle. And I'd nod, the atch of those barren years fading under a swell of pride. I didn't poke at the process. Didn't ask about labs or donor codes. Because I didn't need to. Rachel had it covered, and I was too busy dreaming of first steps to see the lie growing between us. She'd swapped our embryos with her exes. Chasing some twisted vision of perfection. And I'd held her hand through it, blind to the theft of my own child. It was a Thursday night, late. The house dark save for the kitchen light pooling over the table where I sat, sifting through a stack of medical bills and insurance forms. Rachel was upstairs. Asleep, or so I thought. Her pregnancy at 6 months, a milestone we'd toasted with takeout the week before. I flipped through the paperwork, a routine chore, cross-checking dates and claims. Until a line snagged my eye, a sperm donor ID, a string of digits that didn't match mine. My caged in memory from years of tests was 47291. This was 58334, alien wrong. My gut clenched. A cold sweat prickling my neck as I rifled back to my own file. Mine didn't align. I blinked, rechecked, willing it to be a typo, a clerical slip, anything but what it hinted at. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was a mistake. But doubt gnawed, sharp and relentless, and by dawn, I was in my truck, driving to the IVF center. The papers crumpled in my fist. The receptionist smiled. How can I help? Her cheer a stark contrast to the storm churning inside me. I need you to check something, I said, voice tight. Which embryo was used for my wife transfer? She tapped her keyboard, oblivious, then frowned. That's odd. It's not the one assigned to your case. My heart stopped. What? She hesitated. It's a donor specimen, but that needs your consent. I stared. I never signed anything. Her face paled. Your wife authorized it. And the world tilted, ice flooding my veins as the truth crashed in. Rachel had erased me, and I'd been too trusting to see it. I drove home trembling, the clinic's words a loop in my skull. Rachel had signed off, swapped me out, built this lie while I held her hand. The truck's engine cut silent in the driveway, and I stormed in, door banging wide, footsteps heavy on the hardwood. She was on the couch, curled up, eyes red and swollen. Crying already, as if she knew. You went to the center. She choked out, not a question, her voice raw. I didn't answer, just stood there, staring at the woman I'd loved, her belly swollen with a child I'd thought was ours. Is it true? I asked low cold. She flinched, a full body shudder, and that was enough. She swiped at her tears. My friend there, she told me you fought with them. Her words stumbling. A confession already forming. The same friend who helped you switch embryos. I cut in, jaw atching from the clench. Her breath hitched, eyes darting, then she broke. I just wanted the best for our baby. Strong genes, healthy ones. She swallowed. I used my exes. The room spun, her voice a distant hum as she rambled. He's tall, athletic. Good family history, I thought our child deserved the best shot. I laughed, a jagged, hollow sound, the absurdity slicing through me. She'd traded me for a stranger's DNA. Her excuse a knife twisting deeper. You thought I wasn't enough, I said flat, and she shrank, no denial, just silence, her betrayal laid bare in the wreckage of our home. I didn't stay that night, couldn't. Her sobs faded behind me as I grabbed my keys, drove to a hotel, and checked in, the clerk's polite chatter a blur against the storm in my head. I turned off my phone, sank onto the stiff bed, and stared at the ceiling, rage simmering but not the hot kind, not yet. This was colder, sharper, a blade honed by her confession. Rachel hadn't just cheated or lied. She'd engineered my erasure from our child's life. Betting I'd never notice, that I'd raise her ex's kid with a smile. The betrayal wasn't a crack. It was a chasm, swallowing 5 years of trust in one brutal gulp. I could've stormed back, demanded answers, ended it there. But that'd be too simple, too loud. She'd played me for a fool, and I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a clean exit. No divorce papers slapped on the table, no shouting match to let her twist it into my fault. I'd take it all. Our life. Her security. And leave her nothing, just as she'd left me out of the future I'd dreamed. Morning light crept through the blinds, and I made my choice. I'd dismantle her world, silent and surgical, until she woke up to the ashes of what she'd burned. She'd stolen my child, I'd steal everything else. Dawn broke gray as I sat across from my lawyer, Claire, a sharp-eyed woman who'd seen worse than this. If I leave now, what happens? I asked, voice steady despite the churn inside. She flipped through my notes. You're presumed the father unless you contest paternity fast. If you don't, you're on the hook for child support, biology or not. My throat tightened. She'd nearly chained me to her lie forever. What if I prove fraud? Claire leaned back. That flips it. If we show she missiled you intentionally, you're off the hook, but we need hard evidence. Clinic docs. Her had nodded. And our assets. Move them now, she said. If she files first, she'll claim half. I went home that afternoon, smiled at Rachel like nothing had changed. Her eyes wary but unsuspecting, and started unraveling us. Over weeks, I siphoned cash from our joint accounts, transferred the house title to my name alone, untangled every thread she might cling to. The clinic director met me next, grim. She signed for the donor switch, her friend skipped verification. They fired the friend after my push, handing over records, proof in black and white. Each step was quiet, deliberate, my rage a fuel I burned slow, building a fortress she couldn't breach when the end came. I played the part. Home each night, a mask of normalcy as Rachel hummed over nursery plans, her belly growing with a child I now knew wasn't mine. How's work? I'd ask, casual, steering her to chatter while I probed deeper, subtle. Your ex ever talk about kids? She'd pause, then ramble. Oh, he was always healthy, strong. Slips I caught, recorded on my phone tucked in my pocket. The clinic's thorough. I'd nudge, and she'd falter. Yeah, my friend there, she made it smooth. Each word a thread I pulled, weaving her confession into evidence. Her inconsistencies stacked. Names, dates. A web of half-truths she didn't see me tracing. The clinic investigation sealed it. I'd pressed for answers, and they dug up the breach her friend had bypassed my consent. A violation they couldn't dodge. Fired on the spot, her name in the report alongside Rachel's signature. Undeniable. I sat in my truck after, those papers heavy in my hands. Her voice echoing from my recordings. A noose she'd tied herself. She thought I was clueless, still the husband she'd duped, but every slip tightened the case I'd hand Claire. Proof she'd never outrun. 3 weeks later, I walked in early, the nursery's pastel walls glowing soft as Rachel folded tiny onesies, humming a lullaby that stopped when she saw me. "You're home early," she said, crossing to kiss me, her smile fragile. I let her lips brush mine, let her linger in that last second of calm, then pulled the manila envelope from my coat and set it on the dresser. Her eyes narrowed. "What's this?" "Open it," I said, voice flat. She hesitated, then tore it free. Divorce papers, a notice cutting all financial ties. And skimmed, breath catching as the weight hit. House mine, savings gone, her name erased from our life. She'd lost it all in the months I'd worked silent. "You planned this?" she whispered. Hands white, knuckled on the pages, eyes wild. "Of course I did," I said, stepping back. "You didn't want me. You wanted my name, my money. That's over." She shook. "The not mine." I cut in. And her knees buckled, a sob breaking loose. "Please, Ethan, we can fix this." But I turned, watchman, and walked out. Her cries a fading echo as I left her with nothing. Just as she'd left me out of the child I dreamed of. If this twist stunned you, subscribe now. Don't miss what's next. The courtroom stretched stark and quiet, a faint rustle of papers the only sound as I sat at my table, Claire beside me, her files a fortress of truth. Rachel faced me across the easel, rigid, fingers digging into the wood, her lawyer whispering fast as the judge scanned our case. Clinic reports, bank records, recordings of her slips. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, voice even. "Anything to dispute this evidence?" Her lawyer faltered. "No, Your Honor." And Rachel's head jerked, panic flaring. The gavel loomed as the judge ruled. Given the fraud, Mrs. Carter retains sole property. No financial obligation to the child, as he's not the biological father. A murmur rippled. Rachel's plea for emotional damages died under the judge's hand. She deceived him knowingly. No compensation. One tap, and it was done. She sat frozen, her world stripped bare, while I stood, buttoned my jacket and walked out. Calm, unburdened. Claire nodded. Clean win. And I felt it, justice not in shouts but in the silence of her defeat. Every lie she'd spun undone by the truth I'd wielded. Outside the courthouse, the air hit crisp and clear, a weight lifting as I pulled my phone from my pocket. Rachel's number blocked, her texts, her voice, every trace of her wiped clean with a swipe. I didn't glance back, didn't need to. The house was mine, the money secure, the child she carried no longer my chain. 5 years dissolved in that courtroom, her betrayal a fire I doused with cold precision. And now at 32, I stood free, the horizon wide and unclaimed. The rage had burned out. Replaced by a quiet triumph. Not just in winning, but in walking away whole, unshackled from a life she'd tried to steal. I climbed into my truck, engine rumbling to life. And drove into a future she'd never touch. My victory carved in the silence she couldn't break. That night I found the donor code still haunts me. Rachel's swap, a theft I'd cradled in my hands. Believing it was ours. If someone you trust guts your future, don't bend, rise. Like I did. Dismantling her world when she swapped my child for another's. You're worth more than their deceit. See the betrayal, shield yourself, rebuild stronger. I turned her lie into my freedom, learned from the ashes, and now live for meat. Unburdened, unbroken. You can too. If this story gripped you, subscribe now. Share your thoughts below.